Welcome to another another episode of Living with FASD. Very candid conversation. I've already, stumbled a little bit. So this week's candid conversation is with my dear friend, Dr. Kathryn Page, who I am so tickled pink to welcome back to the mic. I've missed you, my friend, just like when the two of us spoke with Deb Evenson, it was just so good to sit down with you again. And I'm so glad I didn't have to wait as long this time. So
Delightful to be with you. And we do have a rich session coming up. It's something that we both have personal experience with and
yeah.
some thoughts about. So I'm really glad that we're doing this today.
Yeah. So this, Living with FASD is a informational and human interest show about living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and why that can be so challenging. And as Kathryn just indicated, we both are living with FASD. So this is not just a theoretical program. This is not, just what's the word I'm looking for? Academics talking about something that we're passionate about, right? But we're coming from a perspective where, yeah, we get it. We get it because we live it. So this week we are going to be talking about one of the things that really is a barrier to accessing services, and it's the whole issue about intellectual versus adaptive functioning, because you can be impaired in either one or both, usually in both. But our intellectual functioning and our ability to navigate life are not necessarily in alignment. So, Kathryn, why don't you, let everyone know what do we mean by adaptive functioning?
Well, it's the ability to do life, really, to manage free time in a productive and useful and conscious way. It's, setting goals and then achieving them. It's maintaining a kind of roll with the punches, internal atmosphere so that you're not, upset about stuff all the time.
Yeah.
It's getting the big picture, being able to plan. One of the cornerstones of fetal alcohol assessment is adaptive behavior through a tool like the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scale, which most of us love. It's been around for a really long time. And it measures functioning, and it's a questionnaire filled out by a parent or somebody that knows the person well. So it's not actually measuring your adaptive behavior, but it's kind of recording other people's
It's a reflection.
Impressions of it, reflection of it. And
yeah.
It covers, breaks down into 4 basic categories. One is daily living skills, coping skills, communication, and socialization.
Mm-hmm.
And so you wind up with an overall score, and you wind up with scores in each of those categories. You also wind up with age equivalent in each of those categories and overall.
And I think I've seen that, like in my training with facets, where it talks about dysmaturity, and a 16-year-old, for instance, in one area of functioning might be 12, in another area might be only 7. Right.
And you've seen that graphic. I'm sure there's a couple different versions of it, and it's been around for a long time. It used to be called the timeline, where you've got an 18-year-old whose expressive language is that of a 20-year-old, comprehension that of a 6-year-old, and of course, people with fetal alcohol do not fit that cookie cutter thing. And the fetal alcohol world is working like crazy on finding out, really, is there a pattern, a predictable pattern?
Mhm.
Still working on that, but
Yeah.
this is sort of generally useful to families to go, or teachers that go, oh my God, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so it's so helpful in getting around the deceptive quality of IQ,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
gives the impression that we are functioning just great because
Mhm.
we can take
Mhm.
this test really great.
Yeah.
Some of us, a lot
It,
of us.
and that kind of makes me think of people that, on a IQ test, right? Or an academic test, they score so high and yet um, they're so challenged in other ways that you could say, for instance, they couldn't find their way out of a paper sack.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. And when you talk about scoring high, let me just say a word about IQ tests. Because part of my checkered career, I was a school psychologist,
Hmm.
acting school psychologist. And so I've got this burned into my brain, right? You've got 10 different categories of thinking that are tested by the old, anyway, IQ test that we used to use. I think it still is. And it's divided up into two rough categories, one being verbal skills, where you know your vocabulary, you can define stuff, you can, that kind of thing. And then the other half is the practical world. Can you put stuff in order? Can you match puzzle pieces with
Hmm.
a drawing? Can you figure stuff out that isn't words?
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of us, in fact, it is a hallmark of brain dysfunction to have a big split between
Hmm.
one area and another area. And so a lot of us with fetal alcohol, we are okay verbally. And some of us are great verbally,
Hmm.
and probably you too. But in my IQ test experience, I'm below average
Hmm.
on the practical part. So the expectation, since a lot of our world goes on how well do you talk,
Yeah.
the expectation that the world has of me and that I have of me is that I can think just as well as I can sound. I can
Hmm.
figure things out, but this is not true.
And I think that trips up so many people. And it's why, when we have FASD or other neurobehavioral condition, um, we end up disappointing people all over the place, um, because there is that expectation that we function as well as we can articulate things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's very
we
disconcerting
it is really
for others.
disconcerting. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and worse than disconcerting, I think it often comes out looking like we don't care,
Hmm.
um, or we're not trying hard enough,
Yeah.
or you
Or we're not
know,
motivated.
yeah, there you go. That's
Yeah.
kind of what I meant by we don't care.
Yeah.
But motivated is, oh my God, what a loaded term that is, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's I do audiobooks, when because I have a 45-minute commute into the city for my part-time job. So that's when I do all my reading is I listen to books, and I read one on, is it Tiny Habits? I think is what it's called, but it's how to create, habits relatively simply and consistently, or how to break them on the flip side. And I just totally got sidetracked. I have no idea why I brought that up.
Is
It's
it
gone.
something about, was it something about how you were kind of sparked to do something about your own habits?
Yeah, no, it's gone. It's gone.
Okay.
My FASD is showing, everybody.
Yeah, there it goes. I think,
Yeah,
I think being
it's
able
gone.
to track, that's one of those things that if you're in a little room with a nice other person and you're taking an IQ test, that's not going to happen because you've got this other person going, okay, let's see, where were we? We were on, this question here, and I'm going to prompt
Mhm,
you. And so that little glitch in functioning, not being able to track where we were going or where we
mhm.
went, isn't going to show up.
Right.
It's one of the many things
Yeah.
that fetal alcohol brings to the party pretty frequently. You're not alone in this one.
Right.
And
Right.
it does not get tracked
Yeah.
on an
I was
IQ.
just talking with a client. Um, we were talking about the challenges with her daughter in school, because the testing is done in a quiet space,
Yeah,
a safe space. It doesn't at all reflect the classroom experience
right.
at all. And Catherine, you and I have talked before about, what are some of those things that can interfere with, right, our being able to function. And that's, distractibility, it's dysregulation. I mean, there are so many pieces that interfere with our adaptive, uh, responses to things.
Yeah, and I think I should say before we started recording, you and I were talking about, or I was talking about, one of the hopes that I have for this series, for this session, in that it might, to whatever degree, push the reliance on IQ really to set expectations or to close the door to services, push that out a little bit in favor of taking a closer look at adaptive behavior and
Yeah.
letting that be a much bigger factor in deciding who does get services,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
who does need some extra support. And
Yeah.
so that's really my great hope for one of the movements that fetal alcohol is taking, and us in particular here today.
Yeah. I'm hoping that that can really be highlighted, um, as FASD, if the Respect Act gets passed, nationally as a disability. I hope that can be part of the shift that is made nationally.
Yeah.
I know with SB 1016 passing in California last year, it'll take a while for all the school districts in California to kind of get on board with how to walk that out. But access to services, across the country are by, for the most part, developmental agencies. Here in California, we call them regional centers. But I'm sure California is not alone in using IQ scores to, be that first barrier, and if you test above 74, then you're smart enough to function in life, and therefore there's no services.
You're smart enough to function in life, says them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really, we function great with the right supports.
Mhm.
I mean, not always do we function great, even with perfect supports, but we function a lot better
Yeah.
with the right supports.
Yeah.
And so the supports for adaptive functioning, I wonder if we could just open that door and explore that for a minute.
Let's do that.
Okay. Does
Let-
anything come to your mind?
Oh, um, I would say memory is something that really can interfere with so much in terms of our ability to navigate life. Um, we have to remember all kinds of things in order to just make even simple decisions, all the way down to complex planning for a day, a week, a month, whatever we're being asked to do. So let's use that as our first example.
So supports for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would be, how do we determine the appropriate supports for challenges with memory, for example?
Well, how would you? What would help you?
Well,
What does help you? Because I know that you do a lot of things. And so
yeah,
I know that you put supports in place, and I wonder what they are.
yeah. I live by my calendar, which is no further away from me than my phone. Yeah, if it's not written down, it doesn't happen.
Mhm.
For instance, yesterday I had to take a foster child. I had to transport a foster child. And I knew this on Friday. I had been planning on it, but it never made it into this. And so the foster parent happened to call about something, and I was like, oh crap. So my day spiraled out sideways, because everything that I had planned to do got shifted.
So at that point,
Yes.
what support did you bring in, either from your internal resources or external, to help get you
Um,
back on track?
I set my timer for how soon I had to leave the house, right? And I went through the quick checklist in my mind about what are the things that I'm going to need to have in hand when I leave the house. So I did that mental review, and then I was able to set it aside, finish what I had been doing, and then act on the need to leave.
I'm going to guess that there was another resource that you brought in, and
Oh,
that would be, I mean, I already am guessing what that is, so you didn't have to guess what I'm guessing. I am guessing that you brought in a little self-compassion.
I did. I did. And that is so important, right? Because, I could have beat myself up. How could I forget about that? But I chose instead to be grateful that something happened for me to remember in time, right? So
Yeah.
because I will forever draw upon, in fact, I've taught this to so many people. Several conversations ago, Kathy, you said the secret to self advocacy is knowing where you should not be, right? What things are you not a good match for?
Hmm.
And in fact, yesterday I had someone approached me with such an incredible honor, um, for a new project that would be near and dear to my heart, but it's not the right fit for me.
Wow.
And so I was able to say that.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how disappointing, really.
Um, I am choosing instead to just hang on to feeling very flattered.
Yeah. Great. I wonder if there's another resource that you bring in that not all of us have. And I don't know if this is a delicate subject. And if it is, you can just edit it out. But I also have the feeling about you that your faith is very grounding,
Mm-hmm.
that you surrender what must be surrendered. You ask for help when help is needed, and that
Yeah.
you have faith that that help will be there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely true. Yeah, because it's for me with the experiences that I've had, my belief is that when that everybody has a job to do, created for a purpose. Purpose, having a purpose-filled life it's very empowering, right? And my belief is that when I have fulfilled that purpose, then my need to be on earth will no longer be here, and God will allow my type 1 diabetes to take me out. And that'll be okay if I've
Yeah,
done my job, right? So I try to live every day, in his eyes, right? That I'm just, even if it's just a minuscule corner of the world, I'm serving a purpose.
which does tend to settle the what am I here for? Who am I? What's my
Yeah.
and that a lot of us deal with a
Yeah.
lot of the time.
Yeah.
I'm also conscious that in addition to giving a sort of settling, organizing context for your identity,
Mhm.
that there has been some great research on dopamine and what tends to kick it in. And
Mhm.
some great old research showed that prayer
Mhm.
shoots up your dopamine.
Yeah.
And when your
Yeah.
dopamine is higher, we're all functioning a little, better.
Yeah.
And so seems like a wonderful thing. Not everybody has access to that kind of faith.
Right. Right.
But I do get that that's for some of us, and I have experienced it.
Yeah.
Where I'm kind of upset about something having happened or a mistake that I've made
Mhm.
in interacting with you, and you just go all grounded. And I know that you are accessing that,
Yeah.
that heavenly third rail.
Third rail. So, but that is a very important point for all of us, right? Whether it's a religious type of faith or whatever other grounding mechanism we can use, it's important to be able to tap into that. There are people that will turn to addictive behaviors or substances in order to get that dopamine rush.
Which is, I think that's really important. And I didn't
Yeah.
mean to interrupt you. Where you were in the
Well,
middle?
I was just going to say that it can be very therapeutic, right? Regardless of whether you're in therapy or not, to learn other more holistic or natural ways of tapping into those dopamine releases, whether it's the breathing exercises,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But
So,
I'm thinking also of 12-step programs, which people have raised regarding fetal alcohol.
mhm,
What if we had a 12-step program really based on the exact same principles as all the rest of them for fetal alcohol? And I think it would be great because, the first 3 steps have to do with my life is unmanageable. I can't change it all by
mhm,
myself.
mhm,
I can get some help from elsewhere, and I'm going to let myself do that. And so when we in the fetal alcohol field, we talk about external brain,
mhm.
although that's falling out of favor as a phrase, I still like it.
Yeah.
Um, but if we know that if I know that my level of dysregulation is putting me into a zone of not functioning very well, which does happen, I now have the faith that I can turn to some other trusted person.
Mhm.
Um, I do occasionally pray, but I don't really have it installed. Uh, but I know, and kind of going along those 12-step principles,
Yeah.
my life is unmanageable right now. My mood is unmanageable right now.
Yeah.
And I can't fix it with the head that I have at this moment.
Yeah.
Cannot. I surrender. I reach out to somebody else.
Right.
So to me, that's that whole, we've known this in the field forever. We've called it external brain, but I don't
Mhm.
think we've given it enough credit.
Right.
And
I
yeah, Go on.
You just it took me down to, I mean, because, my day job is a social worker in a foster care agency. I talk to parents a lot about, are there interactions with their kid? Are they connecting versus disconnecting? Right? Because so many traditional parenting will say, time out, do time out, do time out. Well, timeouts are disconnecting. Timeouts send the message, go, I don't want to be in relationship with you. Go away, fix
Yeah,
yourself. And once you've done that, you can come back.
right.
Well, if a child could regulate themselves, you wouldn't be in the situation to begin with. So instead, do a time in where, you don't have to be physically right next to each other, but in close proximity. And the parent can be the external brain or just that calming presence to help regulation come about. So in the adult sphere, since for the purpose of this podcast, we're not against giving parenting advice, but we're focused on how do we function as adults living with this. It is important to be cognizant of who are the safe people in the different environments where we find ourselves. If we're at work, who are the people we can turn to for which types of problems? If we're in a church or some other social group, who are the people we can turn to help get us back on track if we get triggered by, who knows what, and same thing with our family. Who are the people that we can rely on to help bring us back if we, go off the rails.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think that's a big piece of, it kind of dovetails into what we were talking about earlier. When we're in a room getting, going through the Vineland or whatever other test is in the assessment process, it is kind of artificial. It's a very artificial scenario. But knowing who's there, who can help us, because once we're dysregulated, it skews all of our adaptive functioning. It
which
skew
raises another piece that we were talking about. Did I just interrupt you?
Oh no, go ahead. I was just going to say it, when we're dysregulated, our ability to perform any executive function, any decision making, any judgment, any planning, it's all out the window.
Right.
Right? Because we're in that downstairs brain, that reactive, self-protective,
Right.
life-preserving part of our brain, instead of utilizing what we do have in terms of higher function.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which we did talk about that a good little bit before we went into being recorded. And I think we both share this opinion that the whole issue of dysregulation, the fact of it, the feeling of it, the effect of it, the bringing about of it, doesn't get as much attention in our field, or really any field. Maybe in the autism field it does by now. I think it might be a little ahead of us there, frankly, because there's a lot of awareness and a lot of talk about dysregulation among people with autism and people who work with them and all. But I don't think fetal alcohol has paid enough attention to it. And I do know that I have discovered over my years that my level of upset over little things is abnormal. And I have plenty of friends that we can talk things over with, and they're going, just let it go, lighten the heck up. And meanwhile, I've got something in me kind of churning away. about something I accidentally said to somebody, or they said to me, or I just found out that here I am in Mexico, right? And I just found out that at the main grocery store, people tip the bagger, that's how they live. They don't get paid a salary. And I didn't know
Oh,
that you tip the bagger. And when I heard that, um, even though I'm still dealing with some health issues that keep me from being real active at the moment, I was all ready to get myself dressed and, get a cab and go to the store and give a bunch of money to the people that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Then I talked to somebody else and she said, no, well, just do it next time. And so, good, helpful external brain. But honestly, the level of churning that I felt internally was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and that's in spite of being very good at talking my way through stuff.
Mhm.
And so I, brought
That
all my,
activated the shame.
well, there was shame. Yes, there
Mhm,
was. And
mhm.
genuine regret, real
Yeah,
regret, like, oh God, I'm so sorry that
yeah,
you guys haven't gotten any money from me.
yeah,
Um, you know, and so I I have come to the awareness that the level that I get upset about stuff, even though I hardly ever act it out in any way, I get
mhm.
snappish, but I think you might have experienced some of that sometimes. I do, I get snappish, but that's about as bad as it gets.
Yeah,
I'll throw things.
yeah,
Um, I don't pick up the bottle. I don't generally
yeah.
beyond snapping, but I do get upset.
Mhm.
And when I am upset, I get a little paralyzed. Um, I was doing one of my trainings. I'm training Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health on Zoom, and the technology failed in one of them. The connection kept kicking me off, and my training coordinator was just getting so upset. And I lost any ability to figure out to do what I've done hundreds of times, which is to
Mhm.
get me back into the training.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure it out.
Mhm.
And I was all of a sudden functioning at about the level of my Alzheimer's mom.
Oh,
When she couldn't figure out how to work the coffee maker,
yeah,
having done it 1,000 times.
yeah,
I was right there.
yeah.
So
I
that,
can so relate to that example. I,
yeah,
yeah, I totally. I mean, because, my mom also has dementia,
yep,
and, so I'm constantly being hit in the face with, she's lost another function. She's lost another function. She's lost
right.
another function. And, yeah, that's a challenge in itself, is having to constantly regroup and, reframe, the changing supports that have to be in
Right,
place, you
right,
know, and
right.
and then recognizing when I need to do that for myself, when I'm out of regulation. Um, one of my go-to, it depends on what the trigger is too, because with some things, with some things will trigger just a total withdrawal. I
Do you remember one? Your most recent episode of dysregulation? Do you remember that?
One of the things that gets me is, as I get older, I am increasingly sensitive to noise, to loud noises. Um, and my husband working in the oil fields, he tends to put the volume up louder because, he's got a lot of hearing damage from all the heavy equipment that he's been around for decades. Um, and depending on the environment, I will either just leave the room because I have to.
Right.
Um, but if we're in a vehicle, um, I find myself literally trying to press myself into the seat and disappear
Mm,
because it
wow.
feels like I'm being assaulted. So maybe
I
I
never-
need to get noise canceling headphones.
maybe,
Yeah.
and that would be
Yeah.
one of those supports for adaptive function.
Yeah.
But you and your husband, I'm going to guess, without knowing anything about your relationship, I'm going to guess that the two of you have talked this over
Mhm.
and that you have come to a more or less workable detente.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Although, so when you get dysregulated, one of the things that happens to you, like in noise, is that you press yourself in and kind of try to
Try and
try to
disappear.
disappear.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, what I realized that we have only got 10 more minutes.
Yeah.
And what do we want to make sure that we talk about here?
Um,
Adaptive functioning and IQ. Do we want to talk about some of the
so
things that happen when people's expectations are
I think
you
we
know,
really
unrealistic?
wanted to hit upon, what happens when people are dysregulated, what are some things that can be done to come back? And we have talked a little bit about that, right? The use of prayer or deep breathing or some of those regulation skills that are commonly taught now because there's so much emphasis today on mindfulness, which is, just prayer is a method of mindfulness, just kind of bringing brain and body together. um, but I think with that, when we were talking about that before we recorded, um, we had kind of mentioned that getting triggered, or dysregulated, can, for many people, activate addictive processes.
Oh yeah.
And that can be huge, and that definitely interferes with the ability to navigate life, whether the addiction is to alcohol or drugs or sex or gambling or any other addictive behavior.
Eating,
Food. Yeah.
overeating, compulsive eating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, going back to good old dopamine again.
Yeah.
It's in addiction lore, dopamine is at the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And a dopamine deficit is this might be old science. They might have come up with something brand new by now, but I don't know it. When I was in the field of addiction, it was dopamine that was the culprit.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that there's one of the effects of prenatal alcohol, thank you, mousies, is that you come in with up to a third fewer dopamine receptors in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the early researchers put it, you're born bored.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're seeking, you have a restless craving.
Yeah.
That it takes more stimuli coming in to make you feel normally happy.
Yeah.
And so you come in that way. And the quickest way to raise your dopamine, quicker than anything, drugs and alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Or high risk activities, right?
Being
an adrenaline junkie.
But drugs and alcohol is the quickest.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about addiction,
the
adrenaline dopamine connection certainly is intimately linked, for sure.
Yeah.
But
when you said that, though, I was thinking about, for many of us on the spectrum, we tend to engage in high risk activities in part because we don't appreciate the danger, right? That difficulty or challenge in predicting outcomes, for many of us is challenged, but in part it's that adrenaline junkie. We would be the extreme sports and things like that can be very dangerous, or never stopping to think, oh, I better put my helmet on, that kind of thing. But I'm also thinking, as we have this discussion, I'm also thinking about, so many of us, research has said that those of us who have FASD tend to have a lot of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, and vice versa, right? So let's think about the intergenerational nature of all of this. How many of our mothers had a high stress pregnancy, right? Because of whatever was going on in their lifestyle, they had a lot of stress floating around, a lot of cortisol floating around in their system because of their life, not
Mhm.
not a chosen lifestyle, but because just, maybe there was a lot of DV in the household, right? That's constant stress. Or maybe that, they had to walk the streets in order to support a habit. There's a lot of constantly putting themselves in dangerous environments, right? High
Oh, good
stress.
point. Good point.
And the high cortisol, the cortisol goes through the placenta,
Yeah.
and it, in essence, is kind of a simplified way of doing it. In our brains, we have a thermostat for our own stress hormone system, right? That we have the hormones that excite us, and we have the hormones that bring us down. And if we've had cortisol floating through our system before our births, that thermostat is broken. And our ability to bring ourselves into regulation is really thrown a kilter,
Hmm. Yeah.
because the
That,
thermostat's broken.
yeah. I think that's a really good point, and it's another point that I really wish researchers would separate out.
Yeah.
Um, those of us with prenatal alcohol damage who did have stressed out moms
Mhm.
and those who didn't. And I
Mhm.
think that what you just raised, all that cortisol, and the thermostat,
Yeah.
I think that we would see a different presentation.
Yeah.
I know, my mom wasn't. And so I don't walk around with, I mean, like high risk behavior, not
Mhm.
really. Um, I think that we would see a difference. It makes me curious. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
we have about 3 minutes left. And so we could keep talking forever. I love
I
talking with
know.
you and about,
We'll just have to get you on again soon.
yeah. Well, I wonder if we could just ask people who have watched this podcast, if you have experiences to share or
Yes.
questions. I would be so curious to hear what your reflections are. Can
Yeah.
we ask that, Patty?
Yes, absolutely. Because I'm also, just to make sure I cover it, moms don't have to have high risk environments in order to have a lot of stress. Perhaps there had been miscarriages.
Right.
Um, then a subsequent pregnancy is filled with anxiety
Sure.
about, am I
Yeah.
going to be able to carry this baby to term?
Yeah.
So yeah. Um, anyway, yes, absolutely. Would love to hear from people about this episode in particular. So please email me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. If you would like us to, and tell me in the email, is this a story that can be shared? Or is it just a reflection that you would like to share, but have it not go public? And of course, if you do allow it to be shared, no identifying information is going to be shared. So privacy is the utmost. But yeah, that would be great. That would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
So
Because
glad you thought of that.
I don't think it's I don't think we're alone in the whole adaptive behavior,
Yeah.
dysregulation, um, thing that
Yeah.
happens. And I would love to know other people's experiences
Yeah.
and what you bring in as supports to help you return to whatever normal you hang out in. So I want to thank you so much, Patty, for arranging for us to do this.
I'm trying to shut off my alarm.
Oop,
There we
okay.
go. Finally.
All right.
Pushing
So
my phone, it won't stop.
okay.
All right. I'm
Well,
back.
it's been wonderful hanging out.
Yes, the time just disappeared. Absolutely
Oh,
disappeared.
yeah. And now you have another fascinating conversation to get into in just a
Yes,
few minutes. So
with Jared. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So
All right. Kathryn, thank you.
bye for now.
And we'll talk again real soon. And
Yeah.
everybody, please again email livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com if you want to hang out in our community on Facebook. The name of the group is Living with FASD Podcast. Come on over and interact with other people who listen to the podcast. And again, this is Audible only on Audible, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, or the website Pocket Addict, but it is a vodcast or video vodcast on Spotify and my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is at Patricia Casper, your FASD coach, and it does have another pocket or track of content called Free Friday Tidbits, which is just short 5 or 10 minute tidbits from the neurobehavioral model, which is the primary approach that I bring when I work with people. Or if you like what we have to say and want to learn more, or have either one of us, we both do professional development training. Kathryn, I don't know if you want more clients or if the LA school district is enough.
It's
But
Department of Mental Health.
mental health, yeah.
Mental health. And I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to get professionals infused with this stuff. So,
Yeah.
Anytime I can buttonhole anybody to listen to me for 30 seconds or longer, I will.
Yeah.
And,
We share that.
money, not object, and mental health is my specialty. So
yeah.
Anyway, I'm off.
All right.
Bye for
Take
now.
care. Bye, everybody.